Hi there. Welcome to 5 questions a day for PMP 2021. In this particular video, instead of the 5 questions, let's talk about 5 important notes which are going to help you really ace some of the questions which show up on PMP exams 2021 quite regularly. And all these notes I'm going to pick up from this book, which I wrote some time back, which is called Ninja Notes for PMP 2021. This is nothing but a compilation of all possible notes which are important to help you ace every single question in PMP 2021. Get hold of this. Anyways, here comes those 5 important notes. In this particular video, I'm going to focus on Agile because a lot of people have weakness in Agile questions when it comes to PMP 2021. Well, let me talk about certain notes for Agile. See, one of the things that we need to know about Agile is there is something known as the Agile roadmap or the product roadmap. Now, this product roadmap or the Agile roadmap for a specific project is nothing but the display of high-level requirements, right? The high-level ideas. We just put them, high-level requirements, high-level ideas in a proper sequence that which ideas would you need first. To be honest, this is also called the vision. If you really need to understand what is a project vision, product vision, product roadmap, agile roadmap, they're all the same thing, and it's exactly what I just told you, right? What does it show? It just shows you the overall vision of the project, overall steps in the project, overall releases of the project. Basically, what it does, it shows the sequence of releases that will be done. That's it. That's your roadmap. That's point number one. Now let's come to second point. Second point is then what is Agile release plan? Because we just talked about the Agile roadmap. So what is an Agile release plan? Well, the Agile release plan is basically something like, for example, in the Agile roadmap or the product roadmap or the product vision, whatever you want to call it, the very first release, let's pick it up. And we'll say, okay, this is just a high level requirements or an epic or a release that we are talking about. Now, in the second step, we actually try to figure out how do we get this release made? What are the different iterations that will take? In which sequence will these iterations be done so that we'll produce this specific release? For every release, you have to have a plan which actually depicts what are the different iterations needed. Within those iterations, what are the user stories that would be needed? So this plan is called the Agile Release Plan. Now, when you talk about this process called the develop schedule, over there, we basically refer to this. When it comes to Agile, the schedule means Agile release plan. So what does it show? It basically shows that within a specific release, how many iterations are there? Now, a very interesting question that shows up in PMP exam connected to this is they'll simply say, you know what? Which is true between about the Agile release plan. They'll just make a statement like this, and then there'll be many options. One of the options would be within every iteration, there'll be multiple releases. Every release has to have one iteration and all those kind of thing. The real answer is that every release has multiple iterations. That's it. Each iteration is the smallest development unit, which would have certain requirements to be done, which is called user stories. And you'll have to have a series of those iterations. Remember, iterations is also called sprint, right? So certain number of sprints, certain number of iterations, and therefore you'll get something known as the release done. Once all the iterations are done, we are hopeful that this release would be done. That's what is called an Agile release plan, or simply the release plan. In case you're looking for a course, an examination readiness course, which is going to get you ready in just under 16 hours to ace PMP exam. Does a course like that exist? Yes, it does. Well, all you have to do is type pmvideo.pm-pulse.com. That's my site for PM videos. And over here, you have a few PMP 2021 related videos. The very first one is PMP Dash. PMP Dash for acing PMP 2021. When you come to this particular landing page, you have a video which will give you an introduction to entire PMP Dash. It also contains certain things which are there in PMP Dash. There'll be samples of what's contained inside. You can make an informed decision. The best thing is, it gets you ready in just 16 hours. It contains every aspect of what's going to be covered in the PMP exam. Not only that, it has also 180 questions, full examination set guided by me. In case you're looking for a course which will get you ready for PMP exam in a very short period of time, and not only that, it'll help you ace it. Well, this is the course. Got it? All right. So now let's talk about the third point. You see, one of the iterations in a release plan could be called iteration 0. Now, you might wonder, well, if you're developing something in that, why don't we just call it iteration 1? Well, that's precisely the point. Iteration 0, we don't develop anything in it. You see, first point, you do not always have to have iteration 0. In most of the projects, you'll simply have iteration 1, 2, 3, 4 for each of the releases, right? Which is fine. Each of them would be a development, what you call a unit, a development cycle, each of the iterations. But in extremely complex projects where the release itself is so huge that you need a specific planning only for the rest of the iteration, overall plan for the rest of the iteration itself, then you have an iteration 0. It could be a 3-week, 4-week long iteration only for planning purposes. So iteration 0 is for planning. It's a planning iteration. Do we need it in all the releases? Of course not. Depends on the complexity of the project or the release that you're working on. I hope that helps a lot. All right, so let's talk about the fourth point. In the fourth point, let's pick up iteration backlog. So what is iteration backlog? You see, you had a product backlog, and from the product, we would decide, okay, for this particular release, what are the epics earmarked for this particular release? But you see, these are high-level requirements. Epics are nothing but ideas or high-level requirements, and they've been earmarked for this particular release. And this release is made up of multiple iterations. So what do? We convert these epics, we break them down into individual detailed level requirements. They're so detailed that we can call them scenario, or in Agile, we call it user story. Please remember, whatever that we used to call scenario, requirement scenario, user scenario is nothing but user story. Agile just decided to have a different name for it. There's a different reason for it, economic reason for it, but it's exactly the same stuff. So don't think that user story is any different. It's not. Same stuff, different name. That confuses people. So just remember, user story is nothing but a scenario or a the detailed most level of requirements, right? But then you see, one release is made up of multiple iterations, and therefore each iteration would have certain user stories earmarked for that iteration. And therefore an iteration backlog contains only the user stories which are going to be delivered as an output of that specific development cycle, which is called the iteration or the sprint. That's it. So iteration backlog is earmarked for a specific iteration, right? Not for the entire release, for a specific iteration. See, one release is made up of multiple iterations. So for this specific iteration of 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, doesn't matter, what are the requirements which are going to be completed here? That's the list. That document is called iteration backlog. That's it. Make sense? All right. We've still got one more point left, and that is story points. What are story points? Now you see, has always been a problem when it comes to IT. Like if I ask you to measure the size of this room, you'll simply say, hey, okay. Even if you're not from a civil engineering or engineering background, you'll simply say, okay, let's measure the dimensions, right? 12 feet tall, high, 15 feet this way, 12 feet this way. So you have the entire dimension. You can come out with volume, surface area. You can come out with everything, even though you're not from civil engineering. So you would know that if I ask you to compare two different rooms, you can compare it in a very scientific manner, right? You'll give some measurements which are universal. No matter which person in the world comes and sees, okay, yeah, They'll have the same measurements. They would know exactly that which is a bigger room or which will be a smaller room. They will never have any argument. Now you'll say, hey, Maneesh, what a silly point to talk about. Well, that exactly is the problem when it comes to Agile, particularly IT. Agile is only for IT. Now, when you talk about IT, how do you measure the size of a requirement? How can you say that this specific user story is bigger or smaller than this one? That's where the problem is, because there's a lot of perception of human beings into it, right? How you perceive it can make the requirements bigger or smaller. Then how do we figure out that what is the size of a specific user story? But if you cannot do that, then how can we even figure out that how many user stories can be done in this iteration once we don't even know their size? We would not even know our team's productivity. That's the problem. So, I mean, there are many estimation techniques, and this is not only with Agile, any IT project, whether it is iterative, whether it is predictive, doesn't matter. This problem has been there all the time. So, what do we see? A concept has been created that let's figure out using some Fibonacci sequence, or using t-shirt sizing, or simply saying simple, moderate, complex, any which method. We just get a group of people and we agree to something that this particular user story is about 10 points. Is it 50 points? Now 50 points means a larger, pretty big size user story, but a 5 point or a 6 point user story is quite small, really small. Now, these are not very scientific, but it works very well within the team. It cannot even work across the team, right? So these are not very scientific things, but this is a method to size the user story. Story points is one of the methods of giving a size to user story so that we can do productivity calculation, figure out simple things like, hey, how many user stories can our team do in an iteration of 4 weeks? Simple question like this will not be able to be answered if we don't convert user stories or measure them in the form of some sizing concept, and that is called user story. Now you know. See, this kind of understanding is what is needed for you to ace PMP exam. Just mugging up all the stuff thrown at you by all these guys at Udemy and stuff places, it's going to, unfortunately, they themselves do not understand half the thing they're talking about. They've not done any projects, right? So understand it in this manner, and it's all free. And go ace the PMP exam. So here are your 5 points, right? And keep watching this playlist so that you never miss out on any of these important tips and tricks and the amazing questions that I'm posting here, and with explanations. This will continue all the way till 30th of December 2021. So much of free resources, only to make sure that you guys ace PMP before the end of December 2021. Best luck for PMP exams. Let's go ace it.